Will you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, may the words of my mouth and the thoughts of all of our hearts and minds be pleasing to you, our Creator God, redeeming Son, and inspiring Spirit. Amen. So this is the third Sunday in a row that our confirmation students have asked us, when they light the candle, to close our eyes and imagine. I have to tell you, I love that because I think that's exactly what Isaiah the prophet was trying to tell us. And I think that's what Mary was also asking of us, to imagine a different world, and then to figure out how to make it that way, how to make it a reality. But before you do all that imagining thing, and before you do all that figuring out thing, I think we need to just take a moment, take a deep breath, and just let that joy come over us. The rejoicing, the magnifying of the Lord, let it just kind of wash over us and fill you maybe, and maybe overwhelm you and lift you up. Just sit in that wonderment, huh? And just let it be, huh? I think prophets and their poetry are kind of amazing, aren't they? They sweep us up into places that we don't know. They sweep us up into things that could be and what should be. So take a few moments with me, and let's think about that passage from Isaiah that Pat read to us. Those prophetic words from Isaiah. You know, his book is 66 chapters, and we are in the middle, the chapter 35. And it's quite a history and quite a journey. The prophecy of Isaiah documents an extended and extensive journey of his people. The biblical Israel had gone from a pretty relatively stable monarchy. They went to disaster and exile and then loss. And then they had this new existence amid the rubble and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. I think many of us have seen that on our screens, haven't we? We've seen the freezing rain of early spring and the high winds that blew down trees and electric poles in northern Michigan. We've seen floods that happened in Texas and fires in California and wars and destruction in Gaza and Ukraine. We see people picking through what is left, looking for the remnants of their life, walking around in disbelief and anger and horror. And I just wonder, how do you survive that? How do you keep going through all of that, huh? How do you not give up? And then the prophet Isaiah says something very surprising. He says, they will rejoice, they will be glad. This is Isaiah's vision in our reading today. But the time is in the future. It's a ways off. And what time that is not really specified. But the place has been named repeatedly. It's called the wilderness. This wilderness locates God's promise, I think, within all of our human lacking, all of our loneliness, all of our hopelessness. It locates God's promise within a complex history of hardship and redemption, failure and faith. Wilderness has a meaning for Israel. It's a place of flight or a place of freedom. It's a place where water is scarce and crops do not grow. It's dangerous and it's wide and it's easy to get lost. The wilderness is a place where God's people learn to trust. In the wilderness, God carried them, didn't he? God fed them with manna from heaven, and he gave them improbable water. In the wilderness, God found his people, and he cared for them. Isaiah's wilderness sings. It's amazing. They will rejoice, he says. The wilderness and the dry desert will shout with joy, and it will bloom like a crocus. I love that because crocuses we all know about, don't we? And they will keep blooming. Crocuses in my neighbors under their front yard tree. They come up with the snow is still on the ground, and then there's some tulips in between them. And we see this coming up. And I think next spring, if we keep having all of this snow, I'm going to really rejoice with Isaiah. Oh, and I think you will too, right? The prophet declares that the joy of the earth wrung dry. This wilderness, this dry land shows us the reason. A profusion of blooms shoots up in new growth, and not just surviving, but thriving. The earth's joyous response swells into echoing chorus and celebrates a gift of new life. And the God whose mercy they will see, declares the prophet, is our God. Now the future shifts just a little bit in our reading. It goes from the future tense to the present tense. And with the result of that tense change, it also changes from earth to people, from land to weak and frightened bodies, from green growth to courage and strength. Isaiah has given a vision, and now Isaiah gives to each of us a challenge. He says to us, the prophet shows us a pair of hands that have grown weak and soft and slack with disuse. They can hold nothing and no longer do the work that they were made for. And then Isaiah challenges his audience. He says, make them strong. And then the prophet shows us a pair of knees that give way to staggering and stumbling. And who can walk like that, huh? The prophet challenges once again. He says, make them firm. The prophet shows us people whose hearts and minds are racing and gripped with anxiety. And the prophet says to them, be strong, do not fear. Now, if you're like me, you don't find those words too helpful. How do you say, be strong to someone who's traumatized or anxious or tired? And then the prophet gives a reason. He says, he draws attention now to the one source of strength, salvation. If you open your eyes, he says, and look, you will see that right here is your God. Isaiah sings a song that are words from the Psalms. If you notice, there's a combination of words there. He sings to remind them of the music that's already in their hearts, knowing that this will echo back, like our song says, of comfort and joy, right? And I think that's why Christmas music moves us each and every year. We need to hear that, and we need to feel that. We need to remember why we're here, why we're doing this preparation work. Why do we have Advent? And then we hear the words from our hymns, come all you faithful, to Bethlehem, right? Where we sing with the choirs of angels, and we sing in exaltation in a world that craves comfort. We know that God says nothing can separate us from God's love, right? Isaiah 35 is a powerful poetic word of comfort to a mourning people who have lost their temple, their land, their sovereignty. The good news is that God, the God of Jacob, does not abandon his people in their despair back then or even now, today. Liberation from Babylon is not only a cause for joyful celebration, it's a catalyst for change, for a new order in their world. Freedom from oppression receives divine approval, meets divine alignment. Isaiah points us towards justice, doesn't he? And then we have Mary. Mary with her prophetic voice and her song of praise that proclaims this liberation promise in the coming of Christ. We have Mary's beautiful Magnificat from Luke chapter 1. And you know, much has happened before this text. An angel of God has already come down and foretold the coming of John the Baptizer, the forerunner of our Messiah. John is going to come in power and the spirit of Elijah. The angel of Gabriel has also come to visit Mary and told her that God has shown her grace and that she will be the mother of a Messiah from David's line. And Mary has come to visit her cousin Elizabeth, the mother of the Messiah's forerunner. And Elizabeth confirms and rejoices that she is in the presence of the Lord, developing in his mother's womb. And then Mary responds with this beautiful tapestry of praise, Magnificat, the old word that means lift up or make great. This outpouring of Mary's soul in praise to God. Think about Mary's words. And I want you to notice, I want you to think about how very political they are. 2,000 years ago today, she was speaking truth to power, wasn't she? Her words are unavoidably political. Her words are not partisan politics like our day, but her words definitely have political ramifications and applications. Whether in the short term or in the long term, Mary's song is all about public events that have a political edge to them. She foresees a world turned upside down. The high and mighty get brought low. The wealthy, comfortable get sent away empty. In other words, if and when this happens, it will be the famous and the powerful in the world that will find themselves on the wrong side of history. Those who will be lifted up and exalted in place of these famous folks are quite naturally precisely the opposite, the little people, the people on the margins of our society, of whom people have never heard of before. And they will be like Mary herself. In fact, it will seem that in addition to the inspiration of the Spirit, I think she also, from her own experience, knew what it was like to be on the margins. She spoke from her own experience. There she was, a young, unknown girl living in a backwater in the Roman Empire. She lived in what the wealthy would call a just going nowhere town. And there she is, visited by no less than the archangel of God, an angel who bowed down before her as if she was the exalted person in the room. The angel told her she was selected for an utterly remarkable honor to bear God's only Son. She was told that in all the generations that would rise up and they would bless her someday. And she went from a nobody to a very nearly ultimate somebody in the blink of an eye. And something about that core dynamic of God raising up the very humble from the margins, folks like Mary herself, and probably most every single person that Mary knew in her life, something about that triggered with her the idea that this reversal of fortune is just how God behaves. And that happened to her, will happen to everyone someday. Of course, none of this has happened literally in Mary's day. The ultimate fulfillment of God's covenant promise to Israel, of which Mary sings, was a long way off. And even today, they seem to be really far away from us. But I think the vision, her vision, is still so very valid today. Back then, but also today. Mary's vision is a song that will carry with it some social and economic blueprint for our society. What do you think? Should this song be seen as a manifesto on which to build a nation or a society? What do you think? I believe the political nature of Mary's words should be powerful, should be a powerful shaping influence for how the followers of Jesus Christ live in our world and how we assess value and who we value. I think those of us who follow Jesus and count ourselves as citizens of his kingdom need to see the world as young Mary does. We need to see justice as young Mary does. There is a fierceness, isn't there? There's a fierceness and a sweetness in her Magnificat that our pictures in our minds of what the Madonna looks like don't quite cover, huh? This justice thing that Jesus always comes back to. This forgiveness thing that Jesus always talks about. This greatest commandment thing that Jesus will never let go. I think Jesus is definitely his mother's son. Amen.